Hi everybody, this is Dino Chris from Prehistoric Facts. This is the Q&A episode, so we can actually get right to it, shall we? Benjamin from Hong Kong. Hong Kong Torvosaurus never appeared in Planet Dinosaur. Well, first of all, when we actually look at that show, Planet Dinosaur by BBC, there is an episode where it does take place in the late Jurassic period, in the Morrison Formation, basically in Colorado and Utah. We actually see Allosaurus, we see Camptosaurus, we see Stegosaurus, and we see Saurophaganax. And so we don't see Torvosaurus. And probably why is that? It's a surprise because Torvosaurus is very rare in North America. And also it's because, see, it's probably more common. Probably the fossils are a tad bit more common in like Portugal, considering that maybe it thrived there more than North America, or otherwise it's because maybe Torvosaurus just has a very small population and probably lived a little bit towards the highlands. In the Morrison Formation part of the late Jurassic period of North America. And so that's probably the reason why that Torvosaurus was not even featured in Planet Dinosaur. It's probably because this is that Torvosaurus, this is very rare during that time. And also we never found a complete skeleton of Torvosaurus. So that's also kind of a big issue there. And his second question, did Saurophaganax live in the lowlands or the highlands? Well, it's difficult to say, considering that Saurophaganax probably, considering that's a very large theropod dinosaur, closely related to Allosaurus, given the fact it probably had a very small population. And so probably with all the predators that are actually out there in the Morrison Formation, that Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus are pretty much the more common theropod dinosaurs in that time. Torvosaurus is very rare, probably like maybe 3% of the population is Torvosaurus, but probably with Saurophaganax it was probably 5%, so probably not as much. Probably nearly the same as Torvosaurus, but actually a tad bit more. So probably it's just that Saurophaganax probably was not very common amongst all the other theropod dinosaurs that were actually around in the Morrison Formation, because one of the lessees is also part of the Morrison Formation, and a few others. And so that's why Allosaurus is very common. It's because we find a lot of Allosaurus specimens in the Morrison Formation, and that's probably the reason why we only see Allosaurus most of the time in a lot of documentaries, and also in books. That's why Saurophaganax never make it into books that much. Why did Saltasaurus have bony armor? Well, first of all, with those bony scutes that it probably had on its back, there was a predator that was bigger than it that actually was coming from on top to attack it. And so that's probably the reason why certain titanosaurs actually had those bony scutes on their back. It's because there's a predator that was taller than it that was actually trying to bite, possibly on the back or jump on the back of Saltasaurus. And so there's probably like a certain Carcharodontosaurid that was probably living around that time when Saltasaurus was around. But even though we actually have like some Abelosaurs that were actually living around at that time, but Abelosaurs were never going to attack the back, and they wouldn't have the ability to jump on top of a Saltasaurus. And so that's probably the reason why it had bony scutes on its back, to actually protect its back, because the type of predator was going after it was probably going to attack on top, and so the predator had to be a little bit more creative in order to actually tackle down a Saltasaurus. And also, how big is the brain of Torvosaurus? Well, Torvosaurus, if we actually look at it from a perspective, it's a megalosaurid, and so we actually see is that Megalosaurus, since that they don't have that much of a brain case that has been found with them, so it's going to be very difficult to find out how big the brain really is. But given the size of Torvosaurus, basically it's probably not going to be as smart as a Tyrannosaur. And so Tyrannosaurs were a little bit higher into the intellect of dinosaurs, whereas Troodontids and dromaeosaurs were at the top. in terms of intelligence, and then like Tyrannosaurs are kind of like in between the like in the middle and near the top. So Tyrannosaurs had a good intellect, whereas Allosaurs were a little bit lower than Tyrannosaurs, but they were still smart enough to actually be able to tackle down the prey that they needed to do. But with Torvosaurus, it's probably in the same line as the Carcharodontosaurus. So it's probably in the same lines of the brain size of the Carcharodontosaurus. So not as smart as the Allosaurus, but actually kind of close. And so that's probably where Megalosaurus actually fit in, because Ceratosaurus were a tad bit lower, Abylosaurus were a bit lower in terms of their intellect, and so that probably gives the idea of possibly, if Torvosaurus, of how big the brain is. So it's not going to be as big as Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it's not going to be as big as the Dromaeosaurus or the Troodontids. So Torvosaurus probably had a very small brain, not as smart as T-Rex or Allosaurus, but probably near the same lines as some of the Carcharodontosaurus. So that I can give you on that one. And then Brendan from Morris, New York. In your opinion, what do you think Tyrannosaurs may have evolved if they have not gone extinct? Well, this is a very interesting question. This is a very good question, because you see, predicting how certain type of animals, how they would evolve if they never got extinct, is very difficult. And so, for the fun of it, if Tyrannosaurs hadn't gone extinct, I would say they would start getting smaller. Because since that Tyrannosaurus Rex would actually be the peak of Tyrannosaur growth. And so probably it would start getting smaller. Unless if there's a certain branch of Tyrannosaurs that would ultimately start evolving again. And say if Tyrannosaurus Rex was possibly going to be the common ancestor, and then all of a sudden you start to see these really bulky Tyrannosaurs start to evolve, but they would never get that big, and so that's probably how it could actually happen, is that maybe the arms are possibly going to get weaker, and then you actually have the body mass is getting much larger, but they would never get as tall as Tyrannosaurus Rex. So they probably would possibly get smaller, but they could lose weight. They could possibly lose weight, considering that maybe gaining weight was probably not the greatest idea after all, considering that Tyrannosaurus Rex did gain a lot of weight in the teenage years. So that's probably could be the reason why that maybe Tyrannosaurus would actually start going back to being fast and agile. Animals like Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus, because those are agile Tyrannosaurs, and so we would never know. We would never know how big or how small could these Tyrannosaurs have gotten if they actually never got extinct. But that's very difficult to say. But I'd say they probably just start losing weight and they get smaller. They just get smaller. Their mass gets lower, and their biting power might not be as strong, and so their arms possibly could have gotten bigger, but probably not. So that probably could be the case there. Alright, that's it for now. Now next week will be a special episode, so if you got any dinosaurs or any other prehistoric animals you want me to talk about, feel free to email me at dinocris71@gmail.com, or just go on my Facebook page, Prehistoric Facts with Dino Chris, and you can send me your suggestions there. I already got one suggestion. It might be a Redux episode, so if it is going to be a Redux episode, it might be that. So because since somebody actually did ask me to do Allosaurus, so that would probably be a Redux episode, so I'll actually possibly do that one. For a Redux episode, but I could do another one if you want me to, but just feel free to let me know. But you can still send me questions about dinosaurs or any other prehistoric life by emailing me at dinocris71@gmail.com, or just go on my Facebook page, Prehistoric Facts with Dino Chris. Like the page, you can actually post your questions on the wall or in the comments section. But remember, keep your questions short to the point. You can also follow me on Twitter at CSGRALL. That's my Twitter page. I post pretty cool stuff on there. Take care of the people around you, and also for younger people out there, to make sure to listen to your parents, your teachers, and your guardians. It's the best motivation you can have for good education. It's very important to have good education. So with a good education, you get a good job in the future. Alright, that's it for now, and I'll see you guys next week.